What is your life built upon? What do you hope for? What do you aspire to? And what certainty do you have of achieving these things?
Every building has foundations. For example, this is the Shard on the edge of London's financial district. Standing just under 310 metres high, it is one of London's tallest buildings and dominates the city skyline. But by traditional engineering practices, the Shard, well, it simply shouldn't be there. You see, London is a city that has grown up around the River Thames. And that means the soil is mostly soft clay, a substance that is practically impossible on which to build really tall buildings like this one. Yet, there it is. 18,000 tons of steel and glass, all built on weak and unstable soil. How come? Well, the answer is because of its foundations. Thanks to pioneering developments in digging ultra-deep groundworks, the Shard has over 100 concrete piles that extend 53 metres down into the soft clay. That's nearly 4 times as deep as other similar buildings around the world. So, despite being built on one of the world's most unstable surfaces, the Shard, it can stand tall and secure, all because its foundations are deep and strong. Foundations matter. And this isn't only the case for buildings, it's true for how we build our lives as well. In the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, we are shown the early foundations of God's people. From the very beginning, we see the Lord God as creator, we see human beings rejecting God, we see the consequences of that rejection, and we see the gracious work of God beginning to rescue those who walk with him. As we will see in this series, in the middle chapters of Genesis, God sets up 2 great themes of the Bible through 3 men in particular. The 3 men are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the 2 great themes are God's promises and his blessings.
Together, they make up the groundwork for all that the Lord will do and say in the rest of the Bible. From here in Genesis, right through to the very end in Revelation. God's promises and his blessings, they are the very foundations of our faith in him. In chapters 12 to 36 of the book of Genesis, we are introduced to some key people in the Bible. Abraham, originally called Abram, his son Isaac, and his grandson Jacob. They lived in the Middle East around 2,000 years before Jesus was born. These 3 men are often referred to as the patriarchs. This word simply means that they were men and they were the heads of their family.
Some people, they doubt that these men were historical people. But Jesus didn't seem to have such a problem. For example, Jesus himself in Matthew chapter 8, he speaks about how God's people from all over the earth will join with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in his forever kingdom. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they are often called the fathers of faith. This is because they lay clear foundations for what faith in the Lord looks like for the rest of the Bible. And in this series, we will be exploring how these 3 men not only give us helpful examples to learn from in life and faith, but they also reveal just how deep and strong the foundations of God's people actually go.
We begin with Abraham.
The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him.
These verses contain a command from God and Abraham responding to that command by setting out for a new land, a new home. But at the center of this passage, lying at the very heart of all that God says to Abraham, is a promise.
This promise has three parts to it: a blessing, a people, and a place. First, God directs Abraham to go to a new land. Now, implicit in this command is a promise to provide the land in which Abraham and his family will eventually live. Then, God promises people. Abraham's family was going to grow exceedingly great. They weren't going to be just a great family, but a great nation. Finally, and most significantly, God promises blessing. And this blessing was not just for Abraham. He also promised to bring a blessing for all peoples of the earth. People from every tribe, tongue, and nation would benefit from the blessing that God was going to provide through Abraham. Of the three things that God promised to Abraham, this promise of blessing, it's the most remarkable and amazing. Life is hard. Relationships are fractured, and death, sadly, awaits each one of us. This is because life itself is cursed by our sin, that brokenness that comes from rejecting God. Yet here in Genesis chapter 12, God promised Abraham a way for people to be blessed instead of cursed. God was promising to undo the consequences of our sin. As we read on throughout Genesis and through the rest of the Bible, God revealed more and more of what this promised blessing would involve. Life, well, it was still going to be hard, but God's blessing would give it purpose. Relationships would still be fractured, but God's blessing meant that they could also be healed. And death still awaits us. But God's blessing means there could be life even through death. This promise to have the curse of sin reversed and turned into a blessing is not just a promise for Abraham. It is a promise that God is making to you and me too. You see, God promised that all peoples on the earth would be blessed. And so, like Abraham, if we believe this promise, we too get to share in this blessing from God. We too get to have the curse of sin reversed and our relationship with God restored.
God instructed Abraham to move to a new home, and he gave him very great promises. So, what did Abraham do? He believed, and then he obeyed.
Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there he went on towards the hills east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord, and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued towards the Negev.
In today's mobile world, moving home is a relatively easy process. We get up in the morning, living in one place, everything gets loaded onto a truck or a van, and by the time evening comes, we're already settling into our new home. And even if we are moving overseas to a completely different country, it only takes a relatively small amount of extra time while we wait for the shipping containers with our belongings to arrive.
In Abraham's day, it wasn't so straightforward. Moving to a new home in a new land around 4,000 years ago was a really big deal, especially for someone like Abraham, who was an older man with many belongings, plus livestock and lots of people working for him, who were also considered part of his household. And don't forget that Abraham was also leaving his extended family behind as well. Abraham's father, Terah, He had started to move to the land that God had promised Abraham, but he had settled down halfway there instead, and he wasn't going to travel any further. Abraham was leaving the people he loved, the household he had grown up in, and the land that he had begun to settle in, all because God said so. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? On one hand, Abraham had all that he had known so far, and all that was comfortable and familiar to him, yet it was a life that was lived without God and without God's blessing. On the other hand, God was promising to bless Abraham, his family, his descendants, and even people from all over the earth, but at the cost of moving on from the life that he had lived so far. For Abraham, the choice was obvious. Abraham believed that God would certainly keep his promises, and so he obeyed and went on his way. His faith was followed by obedience. Now, as you watch this video, it's quite unlikely, although not impossible, that God wants you to leave your family and move to a different country as part of your lifelong journey of faith with him. However, through believing the good news of Jesus, each one of us is invited to leave behind our old lives lived without God and to trust and follow him instead. We're invited to have a faith in God that can be seen by our obedience to him. This may mean turning away from living life only for yourself and giving up old habits, or changing self-centered priorities. For some of us, it may well mean leaving one situation and starting afresh in another, perhaps at the cost of our friends or even our families. For others, it may cost us much, much more than this. But for all of us, though, we can be certain it means turning away from sin and the desires of our sinful hearts and trusting wholeheartedly and obediently in God's promises instead. Whatever the cost may be, consider the promises God has given us and ask yourself this: do you trust God to keep his promises, and will you demonstrate your faith in him by willingly and obediently living his way for the rest of your life?
God promised Abraham a land, a people, and a blessing for all the peoples of the earth. This has been the foundation of God's people throughout history. They have built their lives on this very promise. In the Old Testament, we see God partially fulfilling this promise in many ways. Abraham moved to a land that eventually became the place where God's people lived with him as their God. Abraham's family grew exceedingly great and became the Old Testament nation of Israel. And through Israel, many people from other nations were blessed as they encountered God and his people for themselves.
However, there is always a sense in the Old Testament that there is something more, something better, someone better just around the corner. Then, in the New Testament, Jesus, the offspring of Abraham, comes to us and makes it crystal clear that now God's blessing is here. He is the fulfillment of that long ago promise. Through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, the curse of sin is undone, and we can be considered blessed by God instead. Jesus reveals that God's forever people are all who believe in and follow him. And Jesus tells us that there is a forever place, an eternal home waiting for us at the end of human history. This is the foundation of all that God's people believe, and it is the foundation for why we want to obey all that God says. It is a foundation that is very deep and very strong, strong enough to build your life upon it. When God made the promise to Abraham some 4,000 years ago, he was making a promise that would be fulfilled in his son, Jesus. And Abraham Even though he did not know the details of how the promise would be fulfilled, Abraham believed God and by faith obeyed his word. The question is, will we?